Okay, so good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone, depending on where you are in the globe. I'm very happy to welcome you to this Stats Café on producing population statistics from population registers. Unfortunately, our director, Gemma van Houderen, has sent her apologies, but she's been called into another meeting. And she won't be able to participate in this meeting today. We have a number of excellent speakers, including representatives of Singapore, Iran, and Norway, and our regional technical advisor from UNFPA, who will all be describing experiences with producing population estimates. For those of you not familiar with the platform, this is on MS Teams. At the top of the screen, you can see a bar, and along the bar, you have the different functions. You have the different functions of the platform. And if you look across, you can see some of the important ones. One of them is the conversation, and this is the chat function. So you're welcome to put any questions or comments into the chat. The other is a hand. So if you wish to take the floor, we would ask you to please raise your hand and before you speak. And then you have additional actions, which are probably less relevant for those who aren't presenting. And then if you go along, you have a video and a microphone. So this is the mute. And we would ask kindly if you could keep your video and your mute button off unless you're taking the floor. We will, if you do forget to turn off the mute button, we will have to mute people because of the background noise. So if we've muted you and you wish to speak, please don't forget to also unmute yourself. So with that, I'm going to turn to our first presenter, and that's Helge Brumborg of Statistics Norway. I say that he's of Statistics Norway, and he will be presenting on the Norwegian example, but actually it's a bit misleading because Helge has been involved globally in many different aspects of population statistics and population registers, and he's going to bring in that extensive experience to his presentation, as well as describing the situation in Norway. So with that, Helge, I'm going to hand over to you. You have to unmute yourself because I've muted you.
Yeah. Thank you, Peter. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, fine. Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me to this presentation, although it happened 1 hour earlier than I thought because we just changed to winter time in Norway, but it worked. Okay, thank you. I will run through, a short presentation on how to make population statistics from population registers, where Norway has extensive experience, as well as the other Nordic countries. First, what is a population register? It is not as simple as you might think. Well, it is a system for recording and storing data on individuals. That is obvious. But it requires regular recording and updating the data about the members of the resident population. And here I say the resident population. Some countries have registers of citizens, but it doesn't really cover the total population. And this means that new entries and exits should also be recorded, not just new births, for example. New births, but the entries are births and immigrations, and immigrations is a tricky event because most births are recorded in civil registration systems, at least good systems. And the exits are deaths and emigrations, and that is much trickier, especially emigrations. And this means that nobody should be deleted from the register, but the status should be changed of the persons who die or leave the country. I will come back to that. Also, if local migration should also be recorded if the register is going to be used to produce regional statistics, for example, in register-based census. But this is also a big challenge. So there are some registers in some countries that are called population registers, but they are not really registers unless they are updated with entries and exits, such as a civil register of births. If all new births are added, then after 100 years, we would have covered all births in the country. But unless you mark each person in that register with when the person dies or leaves the country, the population will just keep growing and never decline. But more vital, I should say, these days is the register of national ID cards, which is becoming very common in many countries. But unless this is updated with deaths and preferably migrations, it's not really a population register in the modern meaning of the word. You also have registers of passports, driver's licenses, employers, students, etc. And the same thing applies. These are useful, very useful administrative registers, but they are not really population registers that can be used to produce population statistics. But an ID register may be transformed into a population register if all or most residents are included. By that, I also mean non-citizens if they live in the country, yes. And secondly, that all children are assigned ID numbers at birth. In some countries, ID numbers are assigned at the age of maturity, which is usually 18, sometimes 16 or 14, but this has to be at birth. It may even be too late to assign an ID number when the parents come to register the birth at the civil register office, because unfortunately there are some babies who die soon after they are born, and then the parents will usually never go visit the civil register office to visit either the birth or the death of the child. So it should really be a register almost immediately after birth. Thirdly, all new immigrants should be assigned ID numbers. Most countries have a system for giving permissions to live in the country, and they know who come to live there legally. So it is possible to keep track of that population. But the difficult part is then the exits. And for those who leave the population, who die or emigrate, the status in the register should be changed from resident to dead or emigrated. Nobody should be deleted from the register. It is very useful to have the history of everybody in the register. In Norway, we have something called the Central Population Register, and it was established in 1964 based on the 1960 census. At the same time, unique ID numbers were introduced. This register is the primary source of population statistics. It has been like that for more than 50 years. It is also used to draw samples for surveys, so you can draw any sample you like, for example, of only immigrants or of only teenagers or whatever. It gradually became also, this register gradually became the source of demographic data in censuses. So the 1980 census, in the 1980 census, the Central Population Register was the source of all demographic data. But then there were some non-demographic data, such as employment, that were not covered in registers at that time. In 2001, we had the last census that collected data from households, and in the 2011 census was based on registers only. That means administrative data. The population statistics in Norway is made by Statistics Norway from a statistical population register, which is identical to the central register, except that it includes a few additional variables when those variables are, if those are missing in the central, in the CPR. This register is updated with transactions from the CPR every night, 5 nights a week. Dwelling numbers, which were introduced in 2001, enabled the production of household statistics to know who lived on the same address. And the recording of external and internal moves in Norway enabled the production of local statistics, which is very important. As a minimum, a population register should include a personal identification number, date of birth and sex, full name, resident status, which is, you can see here different statuses, municipality or other regional information, address if available. Of course, all these are if available. Place of birth, which may be a place in the or municipality in the country or a country outside, if born outside. Citizenship, which can be changed, of course. Country of immigration, country of emigration, if available, that is harder to capture. Marital status, and the PIN, the identification number of the spouse, mother, and father, which is very useful for linking people. Conclusions, there's a question mark too much. Establishing the population register is only the first step. The real challenge is to keep the register up to date with regular updates of these events, and improve the quality by identifying and removing errors. This takes time. Patience, hard work, and a long-term perspective are needed to obtain a high-quality register, but the work could start almost immediately after the register is established, and to produce population statistics. Production of statistics is a very good way of improving the quality. Moreover, it's very important that there is cooperation between different institutions for improving the register, say between the statistical office and the civil registration office, health sector, which where many of the births and deaths occur, etc. I will now show a few examples of population statistics for Norway made from the population register in the form of graphs. The first is the population pyramid, 1st of January this year, and it shows the population by age and sex, 1-year age groups. I will not comment on the shape. You have a typical, developing country shape with a very heavy upper part. This can be produced several times a year. Then we have a total fertility rate, which is produced for all women in the country, the blue line, but it can also be made for immigrant women, the red line. Then, of course, we need the population at risk, that is the number of women in each group by age, 5 or 1-year age group, to calculate the age-specific fertility rate and the total fertility rate. We noticed the decline of fertility of immigrant women, which is part of composition effects, since more now come from Eastern Europe and not from Africa and Asia. Life expectancy at birth is also produced from the registers, because we have deaths by age and we have population by age and sex. We see the gradual reduction in the difference between the life expectancy at birth of men and women. from 7-8 years to 3-4 years. Here is the immigrant population by country background. That is where they came from or where the parents were born. It includes children born in Norway of immigrant parents. And we see now that the biggest group is Poland, and then Lithuania, Somalia, etc. This shows the population growth in percent per year for a 5-year period for all the more than 400 municipalities of Norway. And to make this, we need to know the population size in each municipality. The biggest is Oslo with 700,000. The smallest has less than 200. And we see that the major population is growing around the cities, all the dark ones, and it is declining in quite more than half of the municipalities, the light yellow parts. The average household size is also produced from the statistics on data of place of address, and we see it has declined from about 3 to a little more than 2 in this 50-year period. Now the final one covers the pandemic, and Statistics Norway is producing or publishing deaths by week for every week. It is published, I think, about 10 days after the end of a week. And in fact, we see that the number of deaths in 2020 is about the same or slightly less than the number of deaths in 2019. So, but for the last weeks, we don't have any observations. And for some of the weeks, most recent weeks, there are delayed records that are not arrived yet. So why is it the same? Because there are fewer deaths from other infections than COVID-19, and there are in fact also fewer deaths from heart attacks and other diseases. Something that is not fully understood, but this is a very useful graph that all countries with a civil registration system can produce. Thank you for your attention. If there are any questions or comments, I would be happy to answer. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Helga. I think if it's okay, we'll concentrate all questions and comments to the Q&A session at the end. So please, if you do have any questions, please keep them in mind, and we'll address them in the Q&A at the end. I think that's very useful to see how Norway's managed to develop such an extensive population register and such a wide range of very useful statistics that can be produced continuously almost from this population register. Next, I'd like to invite Hui-Shan Kwa, who is an Assistant Director at the Singapore Department of Statistics. And we're really delighted to have Singapore because there aren't many countries in our region which actually do have fully functional population registers from which vital statistics and population statistics can be derived. So we're very happy to have this chance to hear from Singapore's experience. So over to you, please, Hui-Shan.
Good afternoon to all. Can you hear me?
Yes,
you hear me? Okay.
We can hear you well.
Okay, I'm Hui-Shan from the Singapore Department of Statistics. Happy to be here sharing with you about how Singapore produces vital statistics using our population register and administrative data. So without further ado, let me get started. Okay, I will be giving you an overview of the statistical system for vital statistics in Singapore, followed by how we improve the quality of the administrative data. I will then talk about some indicators we compile and end off with how COVID-19 has impacted the trends in the area of vital statistics based on available data thus far. So if you'd like to find out more about the development of Singapore's population register, I've included a link to a paper we published at the end of this deck of slides. For some background, Singapore has a decentralized statistical system where the collection of administrative data falls under multiple government agencies. In particular, for vital statistics, the data on births and deaths are collected by the Immigration and Checkpoints Authority of Singapore, while data on marriages and marital dissolutions are collected by the marriage registries and the courts respectively. Our department uses the administrative data that these agencies collect to compile and produce indicators on fertility and mortality, as well as statistics on marriages and divorces. So I'll go on to share on our experiences in using the administrative data to compile vital statistics. So there are many advantages to using administrative data to compile statistics, such as no respondent burden and more timely data, as opposed to collecting the information through surveys, especially during times like this with COVID-19. But there are, of course, challenges along with it as well, especially because administrative data are collected to meet the primary function of administrative processes in the first place. So broadly, the challenges revolve around the need to standardize the data, improve the data quality, and communicate with the agencies which collect the data. I will be using the admin data on marriages and divorces to illustrate how we deal with these challenges and improve the data quality. So this is an overview of the process flow for pre-processing the data. Upon receiving the marriage and marital dissolution records from the source agencies, we will perform data checks and flag out inconsistencies to the source agencies for clarification. Thereafter, we proceed to derive secondary items such as derived age at marriage and divorce needed for analysis. After that is done, we create the processed data file, which will be used for tabulation of data for our publications and also as inputs for the updating of our population register. So let's take a further look at the types of data checks we do to ensure the good quality of our data. We check for the uniqueness of identifiers. There should be no more than one marriage record with the same marriage certificate number. The same applies to the divorce case number. In Singapore, every resident is issued a National Registration Identity Card, or we call NRIC in short. So each card is identified by a unique set of NRIC number. So we also flag out duplicate NRIC numbers within the same reference year, as it is unlikely that a person would get married or divorced more than once in a year. So these uniqueness checks are important to prevent the double counting of marriages and divorces. Next is on the completeness of information. For variables which are mandatory at the collection stage, we make sure that there are no blanks in the data files. And for variables which are non-mandatory, we encourage the data source agencies to provide as much information as possible. These completeness checks are important to enable meaningful analysis of the data. Another type of check we do is on the validity of values. We check that the values in the files can be found in the list of codes provided by source agencies. We also check that dates are valid and flag out records with extremely young or old parties at marriage for verification with source agencies. These checks are important to minimize miscoding or data entry errors. We also check to ensure consistency across related fields. For example, a person who registered his marriage with an NRIC number but was coded as a non-resident will be flagged out for verification. Doing so improves the accuracy and reliability of our data. While our department is not directly involved in the collection of data, we do advise the source agencies on how they can improve their collection methods. After all, data cleaning can be minimized if data quality is good at collection stage. Here are some of the recommendations we have given to the source agencies when they design their data collection forms. Firstly, making critical fields mandatory will improve the completeness of information collected. Secondly, using drop-down lists instead of free text fields can help to minimize reporting errors. Thirdly, introducing validation checks to flag invalid entries real-time will also improve the accuracy of data collected. And lastly, adopting the national statistical standards for classifying fields such as occupation and education will ensure consistency and comparability of data across different sources. So after we have cleaned and processed the data, we then go on to compile the indicators. So let me go through some of these indicators in the next few slides. In Singapore, it is a legal requirement to register all live births, deaths, and stillbirths occurring within Singapore. These are some of the commonly used indicators on fertility and mortality compiled using data from the ICA. One trend to highlight is the shift in fertility patterns in Singapore. In 1999, fertility was the highest among females aged 25 to 29 years. A decade later, in 2009, we see that the peak childbearing age has shifted to the 30 to 34 years age group. And in 2019, we saw a further fall in fertility among those below 35 years and a slight rise for those aged 35 years and above. Moving on to the topic on marriages and marital dissolutions, these are some of the standard indicators we compile using administrative data. The SDG indicator on proportion of females aged 20 to 24 who were married before ages 15 and 18 are also compiled using the population register and administrative marriage records. Period indicators like the general and crude marriage and divorce rates provide a good summary on the trends in a specific reference year. But beyond the usual period indicators, another common topic of interest among our users is on marriage stability. More specifically, what is the proportion of marriages which ends up in a dissolution? So to better measure the stability and duration of marriages, we compile data on marriage cohort dissolutions. We track the couples over time by their marriage cohorts and when the marriage dissolved. In other words, we look at couples longitudinally. So today I won't be going through the methodology in detail, but I've added a link to a paper which we published on the methodology as well as how we compile the cohort statistics. In essence, we matched marriage and dissolution data at record level. What I'm going to show you today is how the database looks like at the end. So we have records of married couples and information on whether their marriage is still intact or has been dissolved. If the marriage has been dissolved, there will be information on when the marriage was dissolved. Final results are tabulated in this manner, with marriage cohort by year in the left column and duration of marriage in the top row. The values in the table indicates the cumulative proportion of marriages in that marriage cohort that has dissolved by that duration. So for example, if we look at the 1987 marriage cohort, or couples who got married in the year 1987, which is indicated by the blue row, we see that 4.0% had dissolved before their 5th anniversary, 8.7% had dissolved before their 10th anniversary, and 12.3% had dissolved before their 15th anniversary cumulatively. Okay, so lastly, I would like to wrap this up with how COVID-19 has impacted major life events in Singapore, in particular Singaporeans who are aspiring to settle down and get married. The preventive measures introduced by the government to combat COVID-19 had a big impact on the number of marriages registered in April and May, the period corresponding to what we call the circuit breaker. We have since started to ease the measures to allow marriage solemnizations to take place, and we have started to see a recovery in the marriage numbers in June and subsequent months. For the other areas in vital statistics, more time is needed to see if there is any significant impact. So the links to relevant papers are in the following 2 slides. I've come to the end of my presentation and would like to thank the ESCAP for their invite as well as everyone present for your time.
Thank you so much, Vishal, for that presentation. It was very interesting to see just how much Singapore is managing to produce from the population register and the linkages with other data sources. I'd like to now move to our colleague from Iran, Mr. Saad Mohammed Husseini. And he is a standardization expert at the Bureau of Demographic and Migration Statistics in the National Organization for Civil Registration, Vital Statistics and ID Management in the Islamic Republic of Iran. And Iran presents an interesting context of a more recent development of a population register. And I think the experience from Iran would be very interesting to countries who are at a similar stage of development, and especially I think their vision for the future and how they're going about moving towards that. So Mohammed, over to you, please.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hello, everybody. I hope you all are healthy and wealthy. I am Saad Mohammed Husseini from Bureau of Demographic and Migration Statistics, and I am speak about the population registration in Islamic Republic of Iran and how it works in relation with the national statistical system. First of all, let's review what we are going through. I start with a short history about how population registration in Iran evolved from a traditional civil register to its current state. Then I explain about the term CRPS ID and how much it fits or point to strategic roles. And let's say population register, and next we will review some major legislative supports.
Mohammed, sorry to interrupt you. Sorry to interrupt you. Could you make your presentation into a slideshow, please?
Can you see that? I shared the portion.
Yes, now it's coming up.
You can see it.
No, it still looks dark for me too. Okay, it's just a bit slow. I think it's coming up.
Can you see my presentation now?
I think it's coming up. It's still partly blocked for some reason. I don't know if other people have got the same. Could you? Okay, now I can see it.
Okay, so I can want you to progress my slides because I can only see, you can only see my presentation where I see the meeting screen and not my presentation. If I switch to my presentation, you will lost.
Would you like us to share to upload it onto the? We can do it from our side. Okay.
Everybody.
Pim, can you see the presentation?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay, I just put it into slideshow. Okay. So, Mohammed, just tell me to click through. I'm on the second slide now.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, let's about okay. Let's quickly review the development of population registration in Iran. Civil registration in Iran in its traditional form emerged since the first identification booklets issued in 1918. For the next 45 years, they registered vital events in ID booklets, mainly for identification purposes. 5 decades ago, the pioneers designed a science-based registration identification data, and this structure is known as Bureau of Demographic and Migration and Statistics. Afterwards, the population registration and civil registration, let's say, established a national population database and national unique ID number issued for Iranians in 1989. So I think you should back to the previous slide. So the civil registration system and the wider statistics system empowered with the national population database in 1992. And these three systems, civil registration, vital statistics, and ID management integrated into one system, which is now internationally known as the term CRVS ID. The first smart card can issued in 2012, and let me say that it was the birthday of population registration in Iran. And now all administrations are mandated to streamline national identity numbers in all services provided to individuals, and required by law that individuals should declare change of address and require for residence registration. The organization also works to establish family registration by linking genealogy relationships. But on the other hand, recent agreement with NSO to use MPD records as the spine of the upcoming census, which would be the first register-based census in Iran, is the most important step recently. So CRVS ID is an integrated system of civil registration, vital statistics, and ID management system, and prepares data for VS vital statistics, and vital statistics verifies aggregated data. ID management guarantees data flow and quality, and they all enable us to well establish a popular registration and family registration in the future. Next slide, please. Please progress to the next slide.
I'm on the one which says legislation.
Yes. Okay, I still can't see its progress. One of our unique properties, not only legislative, the previous one, unique properties of the traditional public trust, unique properties of the population registration or system of registration is that the organization have been only a system, the only system for identification, and people traditionally trust in. So another property and is that CRVS is based on the identification system, and this verifies the validity of the data items for each record in NPD, especially those related to for vital events, and guarantees the continuity of data flow. NPD itself is the other unique property, a database of Iranians vital events with a unique ID, and there are also other capacities that enables us to implement survey at registration time. Well distributed offices across the counties help us to reach more respondents, and group of statistic experts at province level or who are mostly statistical coordinators can handle the statistical routines of NOCR, and so are usually well-trained people to handle national-wide surveys. Okay, for legislative point, next slide. NOCRVS ID is the main authentication authority, as I said. The current laws also enable it to gather any kind of information about vital events, and another nice supportive law is the enactment of 57th session of the Supreme Council of Statistics, which declares NOCRVS ID with a reference for official demographic statistics. This provides a great capacity for continuous quality improvement of NPD and supports its development. On the other hand, unclear data exchange protocols between different administrations and the lack of clear agreements and standards for protecting personally identified information, let's say PII, are still of challenge. On the next slide, please, let's go through our current population registration, which plays important role in the NSS as the only NIN and LIN provider. It has the key role to link other administrative data sets. NOCRVS ID have also provided information for data matching.
Sorry to interrupt, but Petra, we cannot see the slides. We are still at slide 3 now. I think it's because it's currently in protected view, so we'll need to click on enable editing first before going into slideshow mode. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Let me reload it. So apologies for that, but all the slides are going to be made available online, so you'll be able to see the full slide at the end. Can I ask what slide do you see now? Does it say roll in NSS?
I don't see any slide now.
Okay. Let me try again.
I think it's at slide 8 out of 10 now.
Yes, that's right. Okay, thank you. Okay, do you see the slide now in slideshow?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. As a vital statistics systems, our role is a bit different. Cooperation to design and production and providing data for the seasonal sociocultural reports, which is published by the NSO, and playing a role in data matching with Ministry of Health to produce maternal mortality statistics are some major examples of our vital statistics systems in NSS. And as the official reference for population statistics, the organization and accordingly my work at BMS yearly calculates TFR, let's say calculates TFR based on NTD and monthly disseminates 12 rates for vital events. And next slide, let me finish my speech with a look at our vision, which is first to be the next generation of CRS-ID system that implements population registration and provides digital authentication and identification services in different levels. And second, to keep playing the key role for inter-organizational data integration projects, and these two would finally prepare the NO-CRVS ID to be a role-playing public service in computational social sciences through social science computing. And thank you for your patience. This is only one of many possible, always some ways to implement this CRVS system. Thank you so much for your patience, and I hope you still keep thinking about how would be another form of a real-life CRVS ID system, and I hope you share your vision and answer to my question to Gmail. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much, Mohammed, and sincere apologies for the technical issues that we had there with the presentation.
Thank you so much.
I'd like to move on to Christophe Lefranc, and he is the Regional Technical Advisor, Population and Development PA, and he will be looking at from a regional perspective, the population statistics which can be derived from population registers. So Christophe, would you like us to control from our side?
I think it would be easier, yes, if you can do that.
Okay, let's hope that this will work okay.
Hope it works, yeah. Okay, let me start anyway. Thanks for inviting me in this Stats Café. Let me start by just reminding people of additional sources of social demographic statistics, which based on 3 pillars: population censuses, which have exhaustive coverage, but rather limited number of variables, and that also have the inconvenience of having long intervals between updates. Move to the second slide if you can, Petra. Yes.
Can I just check that you see the slides okay?
I can see the title one, so you can move to the next one. Yes, okay. So population censuses, then population censuses, they usually don't include many variables of interest, so we need sample surveys to dig further into specific issues. But when we go censuses to surveys, we lose the exhaustive coverage of all individuals. And then the third pillar of social demographic statistics traditionally is the CRVS systems, in which administrative data is used to update on population change, vital events, birth, death, and which are used to produce population projections between censuses, for instance. Now, we can have the next slide. There's a general trend to move to the use of new data sources, which is triggered by a number of different factors. There's usually a concern on the cost of traditional modes of data collection through samples and surveys. There's also the growing difficulty to reach some respondents as a result of modern lifestyles, lack of cooperation, so it's getting more and more difficult to collect data directly from respondents. Another major aspect currently is the need for fresher, more disaggregated data, particularly in the context of monitoring the implementation of the SDGs. So the constant need for fresher data doesn't go very well with the traditional sources that we've been using, such as censuses and sample surveys. And now there's also the availability of new technologies which make it possible to manage large amounts of data, and so that opened the door to the mobilization of new data sources. So population registers in this context are a possible way forward. They once they're in place, they can save costs, they can enable to produce information on a continuous way, and they can possibly replace all the different three sources that I mentioned earlier to produce social demographic statistics. As we saw with the next slide, please. As we saw with the CRVS systems, when they function well, I mean, it's typically a use of administrative information, the information for registration, to produce statistics. So in a way, the use of administrative data to produce statistics, it's not new. It's been there for some time, as long as the CRVS systems have been used and have been working well. Population registers, in a way, take that approach of the CRVS systems one step further. With a continuous update, which enable in particular to follow individuals when they change their location of residence. So basically with CRVS systems, we have the birth and the death. So we capture the fertility and the mortality part of demographic change, and with registers that follow population continuously and follow their location, then we add migration to that dimension to cover the full range of demographic events. So that's one way in which registers go a step further compared to CRVS systems. The other thing is that registers can also potentially include a much richer set of individual characteristics. So as a first stage of developing a register-based system, usually registers can be used to produce rather basic population statistics, and then they can be complemented by a large-scale sample survey or several thematic sample surveys. And then at a later stage, later on, when the system has been maturing enough, a fully register-based approach can be envisaged, and that would link different administrative registers to produce statistics on individuals, on households, and without the need for data collection. So that's a kind of aspiration that can be derived from these systems. Now, of course, there is a number of essential conditions for the use of registers for statistics, and that's going to be the next slide. The first one is that you need good quality administrative data in terms of coverage, in terms of accuracy, in terms of the quality of the updating system. I mean, as we heard from the Norwegian example, that's key to making the register useful as a register for statistics. The second aspect is that we need some link to some possibility to link information between different sources. So this unique ID number at the level of individuals, households, addresses. We also need a common set of concepts and classifications that can be tracked from different sources, so that these the information derived from these different sources on similar things are consistent. Of course, there needs to be a legal framework in place also to be able to use administrative data for statistical purposes. I mean, in terms of access to registers, in terms for the statistics office, in terms of privacy issues that arise from the putting in relation different registers with different types of information. And the final condition that is related to the one I just mentioned is that there needs to be some kind of national consensus on the use of administrative data for statistical purposes. And that's not something that's so obvious, because in some cultures, administrative sources are seen for their role in somewhat informing the systems such as the tax systems. It's not obvious for people to buy in that this same type of information will be able to produce statistics. So we don't want to undermine the trust in the statistical systems if there's no consensus at the national level on the use of statistical of administrative sources for statistical purposes. So these are quite important and strong conditions that need to be put in place. And I would like to finish before we can have the discussion on a few important messages that go along with the presentation I've made and the conditions that I've presented. I think there's no problem of linking and having different sources of information complementing each other, providing there's sound methodology in place and you can explain why different sources may produce different results and explain why the concepts are slightly different, or there are some methodological reasons for things not to be exactly the same. So all sources are welcome, especially in this age where data are more and more important. At the same time, I think there's no shortcut to produce high quality statistical data. So that's something to be remembered, because we don't want to take approaches that compromise on the methodology and therefore on the quality of the data that are produced. And along with that, I think all innovations, and that goes with the introduction and the setting up of registers, they need to be thoroughly tested and quality assured, so that in the end they may replace systems that were working more or less reasonably well in the past, but we want to ensure that we don't lose in terms of quality by changing the system. And so I think that the conclusion of all that is that putting in place a register-based statistical system that requires careful development, that requires also proper investments in the technology, that requires a lot of collaboration between statisticians and the owners of the registers that can belong to different ministries and different administrations. And overall, that requires to do all that properly and in a high quality manner. That requires time. And I noticed that in the Norwegian example, it took almost 40 years from the setup of the register to the last population census. So, I mean, we are talking about long processes that require careful thinking and proper time devoted to their development. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Christophe, for that very interesting overview and those important messages. I think that what strikes me about our region is just how quickly some of these processes are being implemented compared to perhaps the European examples, which, like you said, took decades. I think in our region, some of these things are going at much faster speed than traditionally has been seen. I'd like to open the floor up for questions and answers and discussions. We'll monitor the chat box, which you're welcome to put any questions there, or you'll raise your hands and please take the floor. I think there's already been a question. Goy, was there a question? So you said thank you for your question. I don't see the question.
There is a question from Mr. Youssef, sorry, about what is your programming for immigration?
I guess the question is around the use of population registers for immigration. It's not directed to any of the panelists, but I would invite anyone who wishes to speak to please address that question. So the question, I think, is what is the use or the potential use of the population registers for estimating immigration? For Iran. Okay, so this was meant for Iran. So I'd invite Mr. Husseini to please address the question. Flora, then Helga, I know this is a topic of interest to you, so then we'll come to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the nice question. As I mentioned, there are still challenges for a complete population registration, and we are still on the first steps. Resident register is one step, migration is another, and so on. These all are normally be added around the existing registration with the growth of the population registration, I think. And it's just time. Can I help?
Okay. Okay, thank you, Mohammed. I'd like to invite Helga. Yes, would you like to comment?
Yes, please. Thank you, Petra.
Yeah.
In Norway, all migrations are reported to the Central Population Register, which serves as both a civil registration and national identification. So everything is combined. So then you have all the moves and and it can be used to estimate number of migrations between municipalities and counties in and out. But emigrations and out migrations are the weakest part of these events, with the longest delays. Sorry. Thank you.
Petra, you are muted.
Thank you. Next question, any panelist, but I think we'd like to invite maybe Wishan or Frank or Christophe to comment. And the question is, any specific insights and experiences in relation to issues and challenges around quality assurance of mortality data, especially around recoding, classification, coding of cause of death, coverage and analysis and estimations of key mortality indicators from population registers and CRVS. So the question is around quality assurance of mortality data. Huishan or Christophe, would you like to comment on this question?
I think the question applies both to CRVS system and population registers. There's nothing really different in population registers on the capturing of high quality mortality data. I think it's, in CRVS systems, traditionally the cause of death is the component of these systems that the most difficult to capture and on which there's the most gaps. So I think it goes with a lot of capacity building on health systems and health personnel to be able to understand the concepts. It goes with the capacity building on the classification of cause of death. That's all I can say. I don't think that registers that, I mean, resolving that difficult question easier.
Okay.
Over.
Thank you, Christophe. Huishan, the next question is actually directed at you. So the question is, do you have a unique coding system for all register agencies?
Okay, so for Singapore residents, every resident in Singapore is issued the National Registration Identity Card. Yeah, so when you want to get married or divorced, you need to produce that document. Yeah, so yeah, the short answer is yes.
Is that so? The unique identifier in all the systems is the National Registration Identity Card?
Yes. So
okay.
Yeah, if you're a Singapore resident, then you have to produce that identification document.
And so can I just jump in with a question there? Just I wonder what happens to people who are not Singapore residents? Are they included in or people who don't have cards, like say migrant workers or something like that? Are they included in the?
Yeah, so they are included in the flow marriage and divorce figures. For the identification document, they could use other forms like maybe their passport or their foreign identification number. But when we do the tracking of the marriage cohorts and whether they dissolve or not, we do not include these couples because it's difficult to track them and the outcome of these marriages. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. We're a little bit over time, but I'll take the last question, which is directed to Helga. And that's, how do you keep track of the people when changing their place of residence within the country?
Thank you for that question. Well, people have strong incentives to report moves within Norway to the registration office. And most people do. This is for schooling, work, taxes, etc. So that's why we when people change the address, then report change of address, then this is changed in the register. There's now a combination of this cooperation with the postal service, so also your mail address is changed at the same time. But I said the most difficult part is emigrations, that people are slow or some have no incentives to report emigration from Norway. So the quality of that is the most inferior, I would say, but it's not totally without value. But some emigrations are captured several years after that actually happened, because people are discovered not to have any income or not to live in Norway anymore. Thank you.
Thank you, Helga. So with that, I think that we will wrap up. What remains first was for me to thank the four presenters, and from us here at ESCAP, we really appreciate your time and the generosity with which you have prepared these slides and shares your experiences. This is really what makes these Stats Cafés a success. So we very much are grateful to you for your contributions. The second thing is that this chat box will remain open for I think it's 30 days. We can continue using it. So if there are any additional questions, you can ask here, and the presenters will see those questions. So feel free to ask any more questions in that chat box. And finally, just putting in a link to a stats brief, which goes into more detail about producing these statistics from population registers. And it was on the basis of this stats brief that we developed this Stats Café. So if you want to read more in more detail, then please feel free to go to the brief, which I've just linked to. So thank you all very much. It's been very interesting and very stimulating discussions, and we look forward to seeing you at the next Stats Café. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Goodbye.